I'm Terrance V. MacArthur, and welcome to Down the Flume, a program on how a group of men cut down ancient trees, built an amazing transportation system, destroyed an ecosystem, and ended up broke. What's a flume? Well, if you go to an amusement park, you get into this thing, like a log, and you go around and around in another thing, like a tube, and then you drop down and get all wet. That's not a flume. This is a flume, a water-filled trough used to transport lumber. Doesn't sound as exciting, but it was really useful. And all came about because of a tree. Not a little tree, but a big tree. The mighty redwood. Out of the 3 varieties in the world, 2 are in California. The coastal redwood and the Sierra redwood, known as the Giant Sequoia. The other redwood variety is in China. The Giant Sequoia grows at elevations between 5,000 and 7,000 feet, soars to more than 250 feet in height, lives for thousands of years, and contains the most board feet of lumber of any tree. If you look at the shape of the trees in the picture, you can tell that they are coastal redwoods. However, we aren't talking about the coastal ones today. Our subject is the Sierra species, the Giant Sequoia. On the map, you can see where California's redwoods grow. The coastal redwoods have a wide range, but the Sierras have very few isolated groves. When Anglo settlers came into the Sierra during the California Gold Rush, they noticed 2 things about the sequoias. They were big trees and they were fire resistant due to high tannin content. Gold Rush towns burned down with alarming frequency, so a building material that didn't burn seemed like a great idea. Now, Congress's Timber and Stone Act of 1878 meant public timberlands could be purchased in 160-acre lots. Now, some enterprising men hired people to buy land and sign it over to them. 2 of these timber barons, Hiram T. Smith and Austin D. Moore, bought up 30,000 acres in the mountains east of Fresno, the land of the Giant Sequoias. They called it the Kings River Lumber Company. Hiram was the money man. Moore was the boss on the ground, running the logging operations, but there was a problem. How to turn those trees into lumber and get them to market. How to get them from the Converse Basin, where the trees were, to where the trains were. The nearest railroad was in Sanger, some 40 miles from the trees. Make a railroad over, around, and through the mountains? That seemed impossible. How about a flume? Sure, build a sawmill near the trees, construct a trough with water in it, and float the wood down to the town. Okay. How do you build a flume? There were 2 ways. If the flume was U-shaped, there was a problem. A wood that was misaligned would block the channel, causing water and lumber to spill over the edges. And it had too many joints that made it easy to have problems. If it was V-shaped, there were fewer joints. Water would oblige to send it on its way. So V it would be. Work started in 1889. The Kings River was dammed to make Sequoia Lake. The town built around it was called Millwood. Trees were cut down, the lumber used to build the flume. In 1890, it was finished. 54 miles long, snaking around mountains, crossing over valleys. It was an accomplishment to celebrate. On September 3rd, 1890, the city of Sanger held a Flumopolis Day. Barbecue, flume rides, speeches, music, and dancing. Over 2,500 people gathered. It was quite a day. Now, once the flume was completed, the business of lumbering went into full swing. Redwood trees up to 3,500 years old were cut down. The funny thing about redwoods, as tall as they are, as massive as they are, they're unbelievably fragile. As the top of the tree, the crown, falls in a graceful arc, it picks up speed. The tree hits the ground with such force that it shatters into pieces that fly through the air. Of all the giant sequoias toppled, barely 20% of the wood actually made it to market. The logs were hauled to the sawmill in Milltown by ox teams, dragged by cables, or loaded on narrow gauge rails. Rough cut into usable lengths, boards were clamped together for their ride down the flume. Off they went, down the flume. Propelled by water and gravity, the units of wood raced down the mountains and hills. Feeder flumes from streams along the way kept water in the flume because it leaked out as they went along. Flume houses, manned by flume herders and flume tenders, made sure everything ran smoothly. Picaroons with hooks snagged the boards to clear jams as the lumber made its way to the valley in Sanger. 300 workers did the chopping, sawing, and fluming. Acres of drying yards in Sanger stored the lumber after its trip. The box yard, the door and sash factory. They turned the raw materials into finished products. 200 men were employed in the town. 2 million board feet went through the town in 2 years until bankruptcy. A downturn in the economy caught Smith and Moore overextended, and the Kings River Lumber Company went belly up. Smith and Moore were wheeler dealers, it seemed, and they were back in business by 1894 as the Sanger Lumber Company. Unfortunately, good times don't always last, and in 1895, creditors took over the Sanger Lumber Company, and Smith and Moore were out. Cutting down the redwoods continued, although the Millwood Mill closed. The sawmill and the operations were moved into CONVERSE BASIN. Now CONVERSE BASIN is a ghostly graveyard of stumps and shattered trunks. Over 100 years of time have seen nature slowly reclaiming the land with smaller trees, but many of the scars remain. Of course, there is one reminder of the glory that once was. The BOOLE tree, named for Franklin A. Boole, the logging supervisor who was talked into sparing the giant sequoia. The tree is 269 feet tall, measures a circumference at ground level of 113 feet, with a 25-foot diameter at chest level. The volume is estimated at 44,000 cubic feet. It's a memento of the past, a very large memento. The flume was quite an attraction. The flume tenders used flume boats, which set into the flume's V and floated along with the lumber. unless there was a leak in the flume upstream and the water ran out. Some men used the flume at the end of a work week for the rapid but rough trip down to Sanger and saloons and sweethearts. The trip back up to the lumber camps was much slower. My grandfather-in-law was one of those men. People used the flume for other purposes. The notorious Sontag Evans gang, train robbers with a grudge against the railroads, hid out in the mountains using the flume for cover. As amazing a feat of engineering that the flume was, things went wrong sometimes. A landslide, a falling tree, or even subsiding soil could knock the flume out of line, sending water and boards spilling down the hillsides. Enter Thomas Hume and Ira C. Bennett. Bennett was trying to buy the Sanger Lumber Company, but he needed money. He contacted the Irish-born Hume in Michigan. They formed the Hume-Bennett Lumber Company. They could see that the Converse Basin was logged out, so they set their sights on Long Meadow, 10 miles away. Their plan needed water and a reservoir to keep the flume running. John Eastwood started the San Joaquin Electric Company and was known for his work on the Big Creek hydroelectric complex. He designed a revolutionary multiple arch dam using less concrete than older methods, which would create an 87-acre reservoir on 10 Mile Creek. It was completed in 1908 with the labor of Chinese workers. When they completed the dam, the reservoir was called Hume Lake. Why not? His money paid for it. The Converse Basin mill was deliberately burned, but the lumber still had to get to the flume. The answer to that problem? Build more flumes. 17 miles to meet with the old flume and make improvements like a new crossing bridge at the Kings River for a total length of 61 miles. More trestles, more cliff-hugging curves, more work, and more injuries. This is a hospital used by the lumber camps. There was a lot of crutches. Court costs were beyond the reach of most workers. Hurt by the explosion debris, $104.67 for disability. Night watchman fell through a hole in the machine room. Death benefits to wife, $2,490. Fatalities happened, and at least one body made its final journey to the valley, lashed to a flume boat. Hume had been troubled by his partner for some time. Bennett speculated in land, sometimes properties he planned to sell to the company. Spent a lot of money, asked for loans from Hume, incurred overdrafts on his salary, had a car allowance that Hume finally cut off. In 1909, Bennett was replaced as general manager. In 1912, Bennett was forced out of the Hume-Bennett Lumber Company. Thomas Hume was getting older and he couldn't take over the California operation. Who could he trust to turn it around, make it profitable? His oldest son, George Alexander Hume, a millionaire who dressed like a lumberjack, was allergic to milk and eggs, and he often worked 15-hour days. The lumber industry was supposed to make a profit, but the Sierra loggings never reached the break-even point of 35 million board feet a year. George invested in upgraded equipment. In 1912, saw the peak output of 27 million board feet. Things were looking good until the recession of 1913 knocked the stuffing out of the construction industry, and no building meant nobody needed lumber. The slide continued in 1914. Production dropped to little more than 11 million board feet. Things improved in 1915 and better in 1916, but the treasurer of HUME Bennett died in 1916, and George's younger brother Thomas, known as Tim, took over that job, kidding about the HB's insatiable hunger and its gigantic maw. The name of the company was changed to Sanger Lumber Company in early 1917 to get rid of any association with Ira Bennett. The United States of America entered the First World War, and Uncle Sam wanted strong young men like lumberjacks. 40% of the crew signed up. The industrial workers of the world, the IWW, also known as Wobblies, were labor agitators known to use violence to advance their cause. So George had to hire security guards for the mill. Less than 10 million board feet were produced that year. And after the cutting season ended, the mill burned down. $500,000 worth of damages. It was quite a year. The war continued in 1918. Construction was restricted by the government, and a small mill barely cut 6.5 million board feet. Thomas Hume died in 1920. George was left to run all the companies the family owned and rebuild the California mill. He tried to restart things in 1923, managing to ship 10 million board feet by flume and truck. But George left California for Michigan to run the family firm in 1924. He died there in 1944, a respected businessman, but no longer the energetic young man who eagerly came to California years before. What happened back in Redwood country? 1926, a forest fire destroyed more than 6 miles of the flume. George and his stockholders looked for ways to get rid of an unprofitable investment. 1927, equipment in the Sanger yards, the flume, and some items at Hume were sold to a Fresno lumber dealer, E.M. Prescott, for $20,000. 1929, Prescott cut and sold about 650,000 board feet and put the flume up for sale in sections. The flatland parts, up to Trimmer Springs, sold, but the mountain stretches didn't. The Great Depression caught up to Prescott. He eventually couldn't make payments and defaulted back to Hume. 1931, construction of Highway 180 caused a fire that destroyed most of what was left. 1935, the Forest Service bought the land for about $15 an acre, and the Civilian Conservation Corps helped clean up what was left of the camps. Sequoia Lake, the YMCA and the Boy Scouts of America turned it into a summer campground. Hume Lake, a resort. That was at the west end of Long Meadow. Even before the Humes came along, it became the site of the Hume Lake Christian camps. The snack bar there has great milkshakes. Oh, by the way, all those lumber barons, Smith, Bennett, Hume, and all the rest, never made a profit from logging in the land of the sequoias. They all ended up with nothing. The mountains won. The trees won. Some of them. Kings Canyon National Park, Sequoia National Forest. We, the people, won.